Have you ever noticed that two people can say almost the exact same thing, yet one instantly earns respect while the other is ignored? Imagine walking into a meeting where everyone is talking over one another. Ideas are flying across the room, people are trying to prove how smart they are, and voices keep getting louder. Then someone speaks. They don't raise their voice. They don't use complicated words. They don't rush to impress anyone. Yet within seconds, the room becomes quiet. Heads turn. People listen. Not because that person is the loudest, but because they sound like someone worth listening to. That is one of the biggest misunderstandings about leadership. Most people believe CEOs sound powerful because they have authority. In reality, many CEOs gained authority because they learned how to communicate in a way that inspired confidence long before they ever held an important title. The way you speak shapes the way people judge your intelligence, your competence, and your leadership potential. Long before anyone sees your results, they hear your words. Long before they trust your decisions, they decide whether your voice deserves their attention. Think about the last time you explained an idea and felt people losing interest halfway through. Maybe someone interrupted you before you finished. Maybe they misunderstood your point entirely. Or perhaps you left the conversation wishing you had expressed yourself better. Almost everyone has experienced this. The problem usually isn't intelligence. It isn't education. More often than not, it's communication. Human beings don't simply evaluate information. They evaluate the person delivering it. Within moments, our brains begin asking silent questions. Does this person know what they're talking about? Can I trust them? Are they calm under pressure? Do they sound certain or uncertain? These judgments happen automatically, often before we consciously realize it. That's why speaking like a CEO has very little to do with sounding corporate, and everything to do with projecting clarity, confidence, and calm authority. One fascinating principle from psychology explains this perfectly. People naturally associate certainty with competence. That doesn't mean pretending to know everything. It means expressing what you do know without apologizing for it. Listen carefully to everyday conversations, and you'll notice how often people weaken their own message. They begin sentences with phrases like, "I might be wrong," "This is probably a stupid idea," or "I'm just thinking out loud." While humility is valuable, constantly lowering your own credibility trains others to doubt you before you've even made your point. Imagine a pilot stepping onto an airplane and saying, "I think I know how to fly this thing." Even if the pilot were highly skilled, passengers would immediately lose confidence. The same principle applies whenever you communicate. Confidence isn't about arrogance. It's about removing unnecessary doubt from your language. This doesn't mean becoming aggressive. In fact, the strongest communicators rarely sound aggressive at all. Consider the difference between a manager who says, "You all need to finish this immediately because I said so," and another who calmly says, "Our deadline matters because our client is making decisions based on this delivery. Here's how we'll make it happen." Both are giving instructions, but only one creates commitment instead of resistance. Leadership communication focuses less on controlling people and more on helping people understand the purpose behind action. When people understand why something matters, they become far more willing to contribute. Another surprising characteristic of CEO-level communication is simplicity. Many people believe sounding intelligent means using complex vocabulary, technical jargon, or long explanations. Ironically, the opposite is usually true. The greatest business leaders often explain complicated ideas using language that almost anyone can understand. Why? Because confusion creates distance while clarity creates trust. Imagine explaining directions to someone who is lost. Would you impress them with complicated terminology, or would you simply help them find the right road? Communication exists to transfer understanding, not to display intelligence. If people leave your conversation impressed by your vocabulary but confused about your message, you've failed your objective. There's an interesting reason simplicity feels powerful. Our brains constantly search for cognitive ease. Information that's easier to understand feels more believable, more trustworthy, and easier to remember. That's why memorable leaders often use comparisons instead of technical explanations. Instead of saying a project needs optimization, they might say, "We're carrying too much weight in our backpack." Instantly, everyone understands. Great communicators translate complexity into pictures the mind can easily hold. Every analogy becomes a shortcut for understanding. Notice how experienced leaders rarely rush when they speak. Many people mistakenly believe speaking quickly makes them sound smarter. In reality, rushing often communicates anxiety. When someone talks at high speed, listeners unconsciously assume the speaker is nervous or afraid of being interrupted. CEOs, judges, experienced professors, and military leaders often speak more slowly than average. Their pace signals that they expect people to listen. Silence doesn't scare them. They understand something most people overlook. Pauses create authority. A well-placed pause gives listeners time to absorb an idea while also making the speaker appear thoughtful rather than reactive. Think about watching an experienced surgeon preparing for an operation. Every movement is deliberate. Nothing appears rushed. Imagine if the surgeon sprinted around the operating room, dropping instruments and speaking at double speed. Even if technically skilled, confidence would disappear. Calm movement creates perceived competence. Speech works exactly the same way. Every unnecessary rush weakens perceived confidence. Of course, slowing down isn't only about image. It improves thinking. When people rush to answer every question immediately, they often say the first thing that enters their mind rather than the best thing. Strong leaders are comfortable saying, "That's an important question. Let me think for a moment." Notice what this communicates. Instead of fearing silence, they use silence as a tool for better judgment. Ironically, those few seconds often increase rather than decrease respect because people recognize thoughtful decision-making. Another hallmark of CEO communication is focusing on outcomes instead of problems. Many conversations become trapped in endless descriptions of what went wrong. Imagine two project leaders after a failed presentation. One spends 20 minutes blaming technology, difficult clients, and unrealistic expectations. The other says, "Here's what we learned. Here's what we'll change before next time." Which one would you rather follow? People naturally gravitate towards solution-focused communicators because they reduce uncertainty. Every organization faces problems. Leaders distinguish themselves by where they direct attention after the problem appears. Psychologists sometimes describe attention as mental currency. Wherever attention goes, emotional energy follows. Spend an hour talking only about obstacles and people leave feeling defeated. Spend the same hour discussing possibilities and practical next steps, and people leave feeling capable. CEOs understand they don't simply manage businesses. They manage emotional climates. Their words influence whether people feel fearful or hopeful, overwhelmed or focused. Have you noticed how some people answer simple questions with incredibly long stories? You ask what time the meeting starts, and 5 minutes later you're still hearing background details that don't matter. Executive communication values relevance. That doesn't mean becoming cold or robotic. It means respecting other people's attention. Time is one of the most valuable resources in any organization. When you communicate efficiently, you're showing respect for everyone's time, including your own. Imagine a board meeting where an executive has exactly 3 minutes to explain why a company should invest millions into a new product. That executive cannot afford endless rambling. Every sentence must move the conversation forward. The habit of organizing thoughts before speaking becomes incredibly valuable. Before answering, mentally ask yourself one question: what is the main point I want people to remember? Everything else becomes supporting detail. Without this mental filter, conversations become crowded with information but empty of direction. One of the biggest differences between average communicators and exceptional leaders is that exceptional leaders listen far more carefully than most people realize. Many assume CEOs dominate conversations. In reality, many of the world's most respected leaders spend significant time asking thoughtful questions. Why? because asking good questions accomplishes two powerful things at once. First, it gives you better information. Second, it makes other people feel respected. Human beings love talking to people who genuinely understand them. Listening isn't passive. It's strategic. Every answer someone gives reveals motivations, concerns, priorities, and opportunities that would otherwise remain hidden. Imagine interviewing two job candidates. The first answers every question confidently but never asks anything in return. The second answers well but also asks thoughtful questions about company culture, future goals, and customer challenges. Which candidate appears more invested? Curiosity often signals maturity because it demonstrates a willingness to learn rather than simply impress. Great CEOs understand they don't have to be the smartest person in every room. They simply have to create conversations where the smartest ideas can emerge. One subtle habit separates confident communicators from everyone else, and once you notice it, you will start seeing it everywhere. They choose their words carefully because they understand that language shapes perception. Imagine two team leaders announcing the same challenge. One says, "We're in serious trouble. This project is falling apart." The other says, "We've hit a setback, but we know exactly where the problem is, and now we can fix it." The facts may be identical, yet the emotional impact is completely different. The first statement spreads anxiety before any solution has even been discussed. The second creates confidence without denying reality. This is one of the greatest skills of executive communication. It is not about pretending everything is perfect. It is about framing reality in a way that encourages action instead of panic. People naturally absorb the emotional tone of the person leading the conversation. If you sound defeated, they feel defeated. If you sound calm and capable, they begin believing the situation is manageable. This ability becomes especially important during moments of pressure. Anyone can sound confident when everything is going well. The true test comes when deadlines are missed, customers are unhappy, sales are falling, or unexpected problems appear. Think about a captain navigating a ship through a violent storm. The passengers constantly watch the captain's face. They don't know how severe the storm is, so they take emotional cues from the person in charge. If the captain looks terrified, panic spreads instantly. If the captain remains composed while giving clear instructions, fear gives way to trust. Leadership communication works exactly the same way. Your emotional control often becomes more persuasive than your actual words. This is why emotionally intelligent leaders train themselves to respond rather than react. They understand that every conversation is contagious. Another habit of CEO-level communicators is that they rarely make everything about themselves. Many people unknowingly fill conversations with I, me, and my. I worked hard. I solved the problem. I told everyone what to do. Strong leaders certainly recognize their own contributions, but they also understand the psychological power of shared ownership. They naturally say, "We achieved this, our team learned something valuable," or "Together we've made progress." This isn't false humility. It's a recognition that people become more committed when they feel included in success. Have you ever worked with someone who took credit every time something went right but disappeared whenever something went wrong? Those people rarely inspire long-term loyalty. Compare that with a leader who accepts responsibility during failure but shares recognition during success. Which one earns deeper trust? Respect grows where ego shrinks. This doesn't mean you should never speak about your own accomplishments. There are moments, such as job interviews or performance reviews, when highlighting your achievements is necessary. The difference lies in how you present them. Instead of sounding like you're seeking admiration, speak as though you're sharing lessons. Rather than saying, "I'm the reason the project succeeded," you might say, "One thing that helped our team succeed was simplifying the process and communicating priorities more clearly." Notice the difference. The focus shifts from personal praise to valuable insight. People admire competence, but they admire generosity even more. Another overlooked skill is the ability to stay objective during disagreement. Most conversations become emotional because people confuse disagreement with personal rejection. Imagine presenting an idea in a meeting, only to have someone immediately criticize it. Many people instinctively become defensive. Their voice changes, their body tenses, and suddenly the conversation becomes about protecting their ego instead of solving the problem. Effective CEOs rarely fall into this trap. They separate themselves from their ideas. If someone challenges the proposal, they don't hear, "You're incompetent." They hear, "Let's improve the solution." That psychological distinction changes everything. Think about how scientists approach experiments. If an experiment fails, they don't usually take it personally. They simply gather new information and adjust their hypothesis. Great leaders apply the same mindset to conversations. Every objection becomes useful data. Every criticism becomes feedback. Every difficult question becomes an opportunity to strengthen the final decision. Instead of asking, "Why are they attacking me?" they ask, "What can I learn from this perspective?" Imagine how much calmer your conversations would become if every disagreement became an investigation rather than a battle. You may also notice that influential people rarely interrupt others unnecessarily. Ironically, those who interrupt the most are often the ones most afraid of losing influence. They worry that if they don't speak immediately, their idea will disappear or someone else will receive the attention. Truly confident communicators don't fear waiting their turn. They know that a valuable idea remains valuable even after someone else has finished speaking. In fact, listening completely often improves their own response because they've gathered more information before opening their mouth. Think about a skilled chess player. They don't move pieces impulsively after every turn. They observe the entire board first. Conversations are no different. Every sentence someone else speaks is another piece of information that helps you respond more effectively. Interrupting may satisfy impatience, but patience often wins influence. People remember how you made them feel, and few things make someone feel more respected than being fully heard before you respond. Another characteristic that makes CEOs sound persuasive is precision. They avoid vague language whenever possible. Compare these two statements: "We'll improve customer service soon," versus, "Over the next 30 days we'll reduce response time from 24 hours to 6. Which sounds more believable? Specificity creates credibility because it gives people something concrete to visualize. Vague promises are easy to make and easy to forget. Clear commitments create accountability. Whenever you speak, ask yourself whether your listener can picture exactly what you mean. If not, your message probably needs more precision. Stories also play a surprisingly powerful role in executive communication. Facts inform the mind, but stories move the heart. Imagine trying to convince employees that customer service matters. You could present statistics showing customer satisfaction scores. Or you could tell the story of one frustrated customer whose small problem turned into a lifelong relationship because one employee chose to care. Which message will people remember next week? The human brain is wired for stories because stories connect information with emotion. That emotional connection dramatically improves memory. Great leaders know when to use numbers and when to use narratives. They don't choose one over the other. They combine both. Consider how often history remembers speeches instead of reports. Reports contain information, but speeches contain emotion, vision, and meaning. When people remember a leader years later, they usually don't quote spreadsheets. They remember a sentence that changed the way they saw themselves. That's the hidden power of communication. Words shape identity. They influence what people believe is possible. Every conversation gives you the chance to either limit someone's thinking or expand it. There is another quality that instantly makes someone sound more executive, and it has nothing to do with vocabulary. It is consistency. Imagine a manager who changes opinions every day. On Monday, one priority matters. By Wednesday, something completely different becomes urgent. By Friday, nobody knows what actually matters anymore. Even if this manager speaks confidently, people slowly lose trust because the message keeps changing. Compare that with someone whose words consistently align with their actions. They don't promise what they can't deliver. They don't exaggerate to impress. Over time, people stop questioning their credibility because consistency has already answered those questions. Trust is built in small moments, repeated over and over again. Every kept promise becomes another brick in the foundation of your reputation. Perhaps the greatest secret of speaking like a CEO is realizing that communication is not performance. Many people try to sound impressive instead of trying to be helpful. They focus on appearing intelligent rather than creating understanding. Ironically, the moment your attention shifts away from yourself and towards serving the listener, your communication improves dramatically. Instead of asking, "How do I sound?" begin asking, "What does this person need to hear to make a better decision?" That single question transforms your entire approach. It replaces ego with purpose, anxiety with curiosity, and self-consciousness with genuine leadership. When your words consistently help other people think more clearly, solve problems more effectively, and feel more confident about moving forward, you no longer need to convince anyone that you are a leader. Your communication does it for you. One of the fastest ways to sound like a leader is to stop feeling responsible for filling every moment of silence. Most people are uncomfortable with quiet. The moment a conversation pauses for even 2 seconds, they rush to speak again. They add unnecessary explanations, repeat points they have already made, or begin apologizing for things that never required an apology. But experienced leaders understand something that most people never realize. Silence is not empty. Silence gives your words weight. Think about a judge delivering an important verdict. Imagine if they spoke continuously without a single pause, racing from one sentence to another. The decision would feel rushed and uncertain. Now imagine that same judge speaking calmly, allowing each statement to settle before continuing. The exact same words suddenly carry more authority. Your brain automatically assumes that someone who is comfortable with silence is also comfortable with themselves. Confidence is often heard in what you choose not to say as much as in what you do. This is closely connected to another executive habit, speaking with intention instead of impulse. Many conversations fail because people treat communication like a reflex rather than a decision. Someone makes a comment, and they instantly respond. Someone asks a difficult question, and they answer before fully understanding what was asked. Someone criticizes them, and emotions take control before logic has a chance to speak. But CEOs who consistently earn respect develop a different habit. They create a small mental gap between stimulus and response. It may only last 2 or 3 seconds, but within those few seconds, they ask themselves simple questions. What is the real issue here? What outcome do I want from this conversation? Will my next sentence improve the situation or simply express my frustration? Those few moments of reflection often separate a respected leader from someone who simply reacts. Imagine an employee walking into your office, clearly upset because another colleague has taken credit for their work. If your first response is, "Calm down," you may unintentionally make the situation worse because the employee feels dismissed. A more thoughtful leader might first say, "I can see this has really frustrated you. Tell me exactly what happened." Notice the difference. The second response doesn't immediately solve the problem, but it creates something equally valuable: psychological safety. When people feel heard, they become more open to solutions. Neuroscience tells us that intense emotions reduce our ability to think logically. Before people can fully process advice, they often need acknowledgement. CEOs who understand this don't rush to fix emotions. They first create space for them. There is another communication mistake that quietly destroys credibility, and it appears in conversations every single day. It is over-explaining. Have you ever noticed that when people are uncertain about their own decision, they often keep talking? They repeat the same justification in different words, hoping that more explanation will create more belief. Ironically, it usually has the opposite effect. Imagine buying a used car. The seller says, "This car is in great condition." That sounds reasonable. But if the seller spends the next 15 minutes insisting that nothing is wrong with the car, you begin wondering whether something actually is wrong. The excessive explanation creates suspicion. The same happens in conversations. State your point clearly. Support it with evidence if necessary. Then stop. Let your words breathe. Confidence does not need endless defense. This is why powerful communicators are comfortable allowing other people to think. They don't feel the need to control every interpretation. They understand that persuasion is not about overwhelming someone with information. It is about guiding someone toward understanding. Think about a great teacher. They don't simply pour facts into students' minds. They ask questions that encourage students to discover answers for themselves. Those discoveries become far more memorable because they feel personal. Great CEOs often communicate this way. Instead of giving every solution, they ask questions like, "What do you think is causing this?" Or, "If you were the customer, how would you experience this?" These questions do more than gather information. They develop independent thinkers. Leadership is not creating followers who always need answers. It is creating people who learn to ask better questions. Have you ever noticed that some people leave every conversation feeling energized, while others leave people emotionally exhausted? The difference often has nothing to do with intelligence. It has everything to do with emotional energy. Every conversation either adds energy or drains it. Some people constantly complain, criticize, and predict failure. Even when they are technically correct, spending time with them feels heavy. Others acknowledge reality while naturally directing attention toward opportunity, learning, and progress. They don't ignore problems, but they refuse to live inside them. Which type of person would you rather work with every day? CEOs quickly learn that people don't only follow competence. They follow emotional stability. In uncertain times, emotional steadiness becomes one of the most valuable leadership qualities of all. This emotional steadiness also changes the way leaders handle mistakes. Many people fear admitting they are wrong because they believe it will make them appear weak. Surprisingly, research on trust suggests almost the opposite. People tend to respect leaders who admit mistakes honestly and then explain how they will improve. Imagine a manager saying, "I made the wrong call. Here's what I missed, here's what I've learned, and here's what we'll do differently next time." Does that sound weak? Not at all. It sounds responsible. Compare that with someone who refuses to acknowledge obvious errors, blames everyone else, and invents excuses. Their authority slowly disappears because people stop believing their words. Credibility is not built by being perfect. It is built by being truthful. Another powerful communication habit is learning to separate confidence from certainty. This may sound confusing at first because many people assume they are the same thing. They are not. Certainty means believing you already have all the answers. Confidence means believing you can handle whatever answers you discover. CEOs rarely succeed because they predict the future perfectly. They succeed because they remain adaptable when reality changes. That's why you often hear experienced leaders say things like, "Based on what we know today, this is our best decision." That sentence communicates confidence while leaving room for new information. It avoids the trap of pretending to be infallible. The strongest leaders are flexible thinkers, not stubborn ones. There is also tremendous power in learning how to end conversations well. Most people focus on starting strong, but very few think about how they finish. Imagine leaving a meeting by saying, "So, I guess that's it." Compare that with ending by saying, "To summarize, we've agreed on 3 priorities, everyone knows their next step, and we'll reconnect next week to review progress." The second ending creates clarity. It reduces confusion and increases accountability. People leave knowing exactly what happens next. Great communicators understand that endings shape memory. Psychologists call this the recency effect. We naturally remember the final moments of an experience more clearly than many of the moments in the middle. If you finish conversations with clarity and confidence, people are more likely to remember the entire interaction positively. Perhaps the most inspiring aspect of speaking like a CEO is realizing that none of these habits are talents you are born with. They are learned behaviors. Every confident speaker you admire once struggled to organize their thoughts. Every respected leader once entered meetings feeling nervous. Every executive who now speaks calmly under pressure once experienced moments of uncertainty. The difference is that they practiced deliberately. They observed skilled communicators, reflected on their own conversations, accepted feedback without becoming defensive, and slowly built better habits one interaction at a time. Communication is much like physical fitness. Nobody becomes strong after a single workout, but every workout contributes to future strength. Likewise, every conversation becomes an opportunity to refine your voice. From this moment forward, begin paying attention not only to what people say but to how they say it. Listen to experienced leaders during interviews, business presentations, and everyday conversations. Notice how they simplify complex ideas instead of making them sound more complicated. Observe how they remain composed when asked difficult questions. Watch how they acknowledge other people's contributions before highlighting their own. Study the rhythm of their speech, the confidence in their pauses, the precision of their words, and the quiet confidence that comes from having nothing to prove. The more consciously you observe these patterns, the more naturally they will become part of your own communication. Speaking like a CEO is not about copying someone's voice. It is about developing a presence that makes people feel informed, respected, and confident every time you speak.